Get started here this morning. I do know we have a few bill introductions. Jonathan Luth, I think, was first in line. So, Jonathan?
Yes, sir. Just requesting RS number 2269.
Committee, any questions or objections to introduction of that bill? What does it do? Oh, yes.
I should probably say that. RS 2269, a bill dealing with taxpayer-funded lobbying and looking to end that practice in Kansas.
Any questions? Seeing no questions or objections, that is introduced. Thank you, sir. Any other bill introductions? I think Senator Holscher has some.
I have some, thank you.
Some?
Thank you, Mr.
Okay.
Chair. I have RS 2344, Candidate Accessibility Act, requires an individual to provide an email address when filing for office.
Okay. Committee, any questions or objections to introduction of that bill? Yeah, let's.
I'm not repeating that.
Okay.
Yes, that is RS 2344, Candidate Accessibility, requires an individual to provide an email address when filing for office,
Okay.
along with their phone number and address, that thing.
Any questions or objections? Seeing none, that's introduced.
RS 2341,
Okay.
People's Voice Bill, allows unaffiliated voters to participate in primaries.
Okay. Committee, any questions or objections to that introduction? Seeing none, that's introduced.
RS 2576, this is an anti-doxing bill. It increases penalties for the act of doxing, which is when someone has posted personal information that is likely to cause bodily injury, stalking, or death of another individual.
Any questions or objections to introduction of that bill? Seeing none, that is introduced. Sorry about that.
Sorry. RS 2447 establishes guidelines for the banning of books.
Committee, any questions or objections to that bill? Seeing none, that's introduced.
And last but not least, RS 2411, which expands the Kansas Silver Alert System to include persons who have an intellectual disability. This is actually a bill that passed last year, but is at the very end of session.
Okay.
So hopefully we get this one through all the way.
Any questions or objections to introduction of that? Seeing none, those are introduced. Any other introductions? Seeing none, I think we're ready to rock here. Then before we hear 249, 254, I think we're going to continue work on 303, which is our bill on the gold and silver, which we, as amended, because we did amend that yesterday to fix the issue with the capital gains. Committee, is there any further questions or discussion on this bill? I know Senator Reichman was not here, but I don't know if you have any questions for Jason or advisor. Or... Okay, Jason, if you could give a quick summary, including the amended version. Yes, thank you.
As Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Senate Bill 303 was heard and worked by this committee last session and passed to the Senate floor, and then it was re-referred back to this committee at the beginning of this session. It would create the Kansas Legal Tender Act, which would designate that gold or silver coin would be legal tender in the state of Kansas and would be subject to the same tax and personal property regulations as legal tender. There was an amendment added on yesterday by the committee to make an exclusion from that provision so that any taxable distributions of gold or silver from a retirement plan account that is holding gold or silver would still be treated as a taxable distribution, would not be exempt from tax liability for the gain on that distribution. Correct.
Any other questions or for Jason or any other discussion questions? I know yesterday Senator Longbine brought up some concern about there may be some confusion. People would take the coin to a bank and expect to be able to exchange for dollars. And it's a valid concern. I think this won't be widely used right out of the gate, but it certainly gives Kansans a pathway for if they'd like to utilize that. Yes, Senator Holscher.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I also had some of the same concerns, and I reached out to some of our contacts within the banking industry. Because I don't believe last year we had heard from anybody within the banking profession necessarily. And so they were gathering some information. I have not heard back yet at this point. Obviously, that was a pretty short time frame. So I still do have some questions in my mind as far as some of the things that Senator Longbine mentioned, as far as some concerns with the bill itself.
Okay. And I do know that basically this doesn't force anyone to accept it, which is we're not forcing it on them. So the bank would just have to tell somebody, hey, this is not how it works. So with that, what is the will of the committee on Senate Bill 303? Senator Blasey.
I move that we move Senate Bill 303 out favorably for passage as amended.
Is there a second? Second by Senator Cluse. So we have a motion by Senator Blasey to pass Senate Bill 303 out as amended, seconded by Senator Cluse. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. The bill passes, and we will send that to the floor. Thank you, committee. Okay, we're going to close out Senate Bill 303. Now we're going to open to hearings on Senate Bill 249 and 254. Now, these are similar bills in wording. There's a slight difference in 254. Jason, do you prefer to just explain them both at once, or I think that's probably the easiest way to do this, committee? Yeah, let's have Jason explain them both. But I do think there will be some discussion on this. And we'll have Jason go ahead with that when you're ready, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I will start with Senate Bill 249. And this is a bill that would modify the process by which individuals are appointed to fill the unexpired term if there's a vacancy in the office of the state treasurer or the commissioner of insurance. If you recall, there are, in addition to the governor and lieutenant governor, 4 other statewide elected offices: the attorney general, the secretary of state, the state treasurer, and the commissioner of insurance. The attorney general and the secretary of state vacancies are provided for under the state constitution by provision there as to filling those vacancies by gubernatorial appointment. However, the Office of State Treasurer and the Commissioner of Insurance vacancies are determined by state law. And so Senate Bill 249 would amend, excuse me, those statutes and establish a new section of law providing for how those vacancies in those offices are to be filled. Under current law, those appointments are to be made by the governor at the time the vacancy occurs. Under 249, the governor must appoint an individual who wins the election to fill that vacancy. And then new section 1 of the bill basically lays out what this type of election is and how it is to be conducted. This would be an election at the convention of delegates of the state political party. That is the same as the candidate who is elected to the office. So if a Republican is elected to the office of state treasurer and then that the person steps down or the office becomes vacant for any reason, there would be a convention of delegates of the Republican Party held. There would be an election at that convention to name the replacement to fill that vacancy for the unexpired term of that office. That convention has to be held within 21 days after the vacancy or notice of the vacancy has occurred. It would be conducted by secret ballot, and they would have multiple rounds of voting until one candidate had received a majority of the votes cast at that convention election. Upon the election of the replacement, then the chairperson or vice chairperson of the state party is to notify the governor by certifying the election results to the governor and sending a copy to the Secretary of State of the individual who has been elected to fill that vacancy. The governor then is required within 1 week to appoint that person to that office, or if the governor fails to do so, the statute declares that person to have been appointed and to fill the unexpired term of that office. There is a provision if the individual holding the office was elected was an independent individual, then the vacancy is filled as per current law, with the governor simply making an appointment of a suitable person to fill the unexpired portion of that term. You will note on the back side of the bill, there are 2 statutes that are amended. These are statutes that currently provide for filling these vacancies. Section 2 deals with the Office of the State Treasurer. Section 3 deals with the Office of the Commissioner of Insurance. Both of those are amended to simply refer to that new Section 1 with respect to how those vacancies are to be filled. That would go into effect on July 1st of this year if it's enacted. I can pause there for questions, Mr. Chairman, or I can proceed with Senate Bill 254.
Any questions? Yeah, we have several. Senator Reichman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the presentation. My question is, do you know how other states handle this? Thank you.
With respect to their own state elected officers, it varies wildly. I mean, I haven't done a survey or looked at any NCSL surveys of it. I would imagine gubernatorial appointment is probably a predominant method of filling vacancies. Some states could offer a special election that's to be held within a certain number of days after the vacancy occurs. Some may defer to other political parties for appointment. I would just have to, we'd have to do some research on that and get back to you in terms of actual numbers.
And there may be, I don't know if our conferee has that or not on the statewide. Senator Fausto.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Of what you just described, we're talking about state treasurer, we're talking about insurance commissioner. Maybe there's a primary or not, but usually whoever wins that position, perhaps during that general election, they are voted on by Democrats and Republicans and affiliated. I mean, the ultimate winner perhaps is voted on by both parties. So therefore, why would it be fair? I mean, we understand we're taking the power from the governor to make that decision, but perhaps I voted for that state treasurer, and I being a Democrat, how is it being justified to be fair that only that majority party would get to have that delegation election and make that final decision? Is that mentioned in the legislation or?
Senator, there is no intent statement included in the legislation, which I believe your question gets to as to the intent of the policy that's being proposed. And so I'm going to defer that to our conferee.
Senator Blasey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jason, how long is this current practice of the governor being, how long has that been in practice in the state of Kansas? Since our state's creation, or is there a time?
I know these particular statutes have been on the books for several decades in terms of filling those vacancies. So it has been a long-standing practice with respect to these 2 offices.
This might be a question for research, Mr. Chairman, but do we have an idea how many times this practice has been executed in terms of filling vacancies?
Let's have Elena, have you guys take a look at that, see if you can find something very quickly while we're hearing the bill.
And last question, I maybe mentioned, I missed it, so I apologize. Secretary of State's office and Attorney General are not mentioned, so what's the difference?
Those vacancies in those 2 offices is provided for by constitutional provision in the state constitution, and the state constitution provides that the governor is to appoint a replacement to those offices. So you would need a constitutional amendment to change the process for those offices.
Any other questions? Seeing none, go ahead to 254.
Okay. Senate Bill 254 is very similar in terms of the structure of the bill. It will look similar. The primary difference is the office we're talking about. Under Senate Bill 254, we're discussing vacancies in the office of a United States Senator for the state of Kansas. There is a current statute you'll see on page 2 of the bill that again provides for the governor to make a temporary appointment to fill a vacancy until there's a next election of representatives in Congress, at which point then the vacancy is to be filled by election. And so the temporary appointment would only be for no more than a possible maximum of 2 years, because then you would have another U.S. Congress election for House of Representatives, and then there would be an election to fill the Senate vacancy seat under current law. Senate Bill 254 would replace that, however, with a state political party election run almost the same way as what I just described under Senate Bill 249. So it would be a state party delegate convention of the same political party as the vacating U.S. Senator to name a candidate and then have the governor appoint the winner of that convention election to fill the vacancy of that unexpired term. And so that is all very similar. Again, it would go into effect in 2024. I will mention, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, that vacancies in the offices of a U.S. Senator are provided for under the U.S. Constitution and the 17th Amendment that changed the U.S. Senate to be a popular election office, and so it also provided for vacancies. The default under the U.S. Constitution is gubernatorial appointment. The fallback is the state legislature can direct that the governor can only appoint temporarily, subject to a subsequent election. Most of those elections in other states are either general or special statewide elections, not confined to just a political party. And so Senate Bill 254 is arguably in conflict with the 17th Amendment under U.S. Constitution and potentially would be subject to a constitutional challenge if it was enacted. I just wanted to make the committee aware of that, and I'll be happy to stand for any questions.
Senator Blasey?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jason, is it potentially unconstitutional in violation of the 17th Amendment if the legislature were to appoint the senator to fill the vacancy until the next election like we did prior to the 17th Amendment?
Yes.
Yeah, in fact, we were looking at that, and there is a little bit of a conflict, and I think that there may be, we can address that with the conferee. But I had one question also about the 17th Amendment, because it says, provided that the legislature of any state may empower the executive thereof to make temporary appointments. Does that give the legislature latitude because until the people fill the vacancies by election, as the legislature may direct?
That is the discretional option of the legislature. The default is gubernatorial appointment for the unexpired term. The alternative option that legislatures may exercise is only a temporary appointment by the governor, and then subject to a subsequent election that is then dictated. And in some states, the legislature has set that to be the next general election of, like, you know, for the U.S. House of Representatives. Some states set a special election to be held within a certain number of days after the vacancy occurs. I think a couple of states even have it temporary or leave it vacant until the next election of the U.S. Senator of that seat. And so it varies a little bit. Again, we could probably look on NCSL and get a survey of states as to how the different states handle that, but that is an alternative option for legislatures to exercise, but still typically involves a temporary appointment by the governor.
In fact, I think that there is a Congressional Research Service that we have available. Maybe I'll have Sheila upload that so that the committee can see the various ways that states do. There's a number of different ways. So any other questions? Seeing none, thank you, Jason. Oh, did you have one? I'm sorry, Senator Falscato.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Jason, on Senate Bill 254, so that's dealing with congressional.
Yes, United
Like,
States Senate
okay.
office.
So if you could just really explain the major difference in what this legislation is trying to do. So when I first came into the legislature, there was a vacancy. A senator retired. The precinct committee people initially elected me. Then I had to run on my own the next time. So what's the major difference? Because we're already doing that. It's basically our party, my party, selected me to fill that seat. So what's the major difference?
In your case, Senator, is a state Senate seat that was being filled, and so we have state laws that provide for filling those vacancies. This is a seat of a United States Senator up in Washington, and so that is dictated by the 17th Amendment to the United States Constitution in terms of how that vacancy is to be filled.
Mr. Chairman, so then why are we dealing with it?
The bill proposes, so the 17th Amendment offers the state legislatures some options in terms of how to appoint a replacement for that vacancy. This bill is offering up one method to do so, albeit most likely unconstitutional in violation of the 17th Amendment. Many other states have other different methods for filling that appointment, and so I believe that's what's under consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you, Jason. I appreciate that very much. We're going to start. We have one conferee on the oral proponent side, and that's Senator Karen Tyson. And Senator Tyson will, I think, probably address both bills since they have similarities and then some of the differences with 254.
Thank you. Which one do you want me to start with, Mr. Chairman?
Maybe start with the simple one on 249.
249 is
move
simple.
to 254 and
Okay.
discuss that.
Thank you. And it's not the first time we've seen this legislation. Other people have brought the idea too. It's just I saw that there wasn't any movement. We weren't getting anything done. So I very much appreciate you having the hearing on it and the committee listening to it. This is about the opportunity for voices to be heard in elections. And we know that elections bring transparency and accountability. So that's all I'm asking for. Instead of one person having control, and I don't care which party the person's in, I really don't. This should have been done years ago. And that way individuals can have a voice as to the replacement. And then we know that there would be an election in the years coming. So with that, I'd stand for questions on 249.
Any questions on 249? I think simply, just to make sure people are very clear, this is just to fill a vacancy until the next election.
Absolutely.
And this is just the method to do so. So if it were a Democrat state treasurer, for example, they would be replaced temporarily with a Democrat state treasurer or a Republican insurance commissioner with a Republican, so that the will of the people is considered in that election.
Absolutely. Now, if I may, Mr. Chairman, with our form of government, we do have separations of power. We have the administration, judicial, and the legislative branch. And by allowing just one person in the administrative branch to fill these statewide positions, we don't do that at the local level. We don't do that for our state representatives or our state senators. We don't do that for county sheriff, any replacement election that are partisan. So this would just bring us into similarity or the same process as we use for replacement elections on those other offices.
Any other questions, committee? Go ahead then with this. Oh, did you have one, Senator Reichman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think just to make sure, this is just a replacement for treasurer and insurance. Is that
Yes.
correct?
Yes, and I'm glad you, if I may, Mr. Chairman, I'm glad you asked that question. The reason I didn't bring the other two offices is because it is a constitutional amendment. And if you remember, I brought a constitutional change on tax, and I felt like one issue at a time. So that's why you don't see the other two from me.
Any other questions? Seeing none, you can go ahead with Senate Bill 254 on the U.S. Senate vacancies.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So 254 was to kick off the conversation on the process that we use to name a U.S. Senator. I did not realize, I guess maybe Jason had said something about it being unconstitutional possibly, but I do think that's also an opinion. It has not been challenged by anyone, and but I don't recommend that we be the one to challenge. In fact, in my testimony, if you look, I included all of NCSL, all the states, and the processes that they use for suggested changes or amendments as needed to this legislation. I would suggest looking at Oregon. I think that Oregon does a lot of things similar to Kansas currently, and that would be a good process. Basically defines a replacement election, and it would alleviate the concerns of the good senator, the ranking, and what it would do. My intent with this legislation, and I guess I should have read the draft a little closer, was to mimic or model the replacement election process for U.S. Congress. That was my intent. So the party would define the candidate to go forward in the election, each party. That was my intent.
Okay. Questions? Seeing none, thank you, Senator. I appreciate that very much.
Thank you.
And yeah, in your testimony, I see that describes that
Yeah, and if
process
I
in
may,
Oregon.
Mr. Chairman, these positions are so critical and so important to our state and obviously the U.S. to this nation. And I just think that we are founded on a government of elected representatives, and so therefore we should improve this process to have those election cycles and allow the people to be the voice.
And with regard to the actual bill that we have before us, Senate Bill 254.
I would recommend amendment.
We are going to, yeah.
That
so
would be
we'll-
great, and I would recommend based off Oregon language if you would look at it. But there's other states that are very similar. Wisconsin's similar to Oregon. That's why I gave you the list. I want the committee to decide the best possible process. So, thank you.
Very good. Did you have one other question, Senator Fasquedo?
I do. Thank you, Madam Chair. Senator Tyson, thank you. So in the original intent or the reason for the legislation now, so you said it's been introduced before, but there was no movement. Has there been a recent occurrence to elevate your advocacy for the legislation?
Actually, there's not been. I know coincidentally there was, I requested the bill before Senator Feinstein died, okay? We haven't had this in the last, 10, 15, no, 20 years. We've replaced 2 treasurers. We've replaced 1 Secretary of State. I may not be accurate, quite accurate, but I know those replacements have occurred. So I just have been watching it through the years, and I thought it doesn't make sense to me, one person deciding such a critical position. Like I said, if you guys define a different process, that's fine, but I don't think it should just be one person naming. I mean, even for our judicial process, we give a list to the governor, or not we, but lawyers and, yeah. Lawyers and others give the list to the governor. So it's not just one person deciding. There is a process, and I do think we need to address that in the state.
And looking at Oregon, it just basically, the vacancies are filled only by special elections, and they expedite a special election. So it's a pretty simple process.
It is, and it makes it even simpler since Kansas went to August and November primaries on even and odd numbered years. So that, I mean, for us, it might be even cleaner process than other states.
Thank you, Senator. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
There's 3 written proponents in your, well, it's certainly anybody looking at the electronic version, I think in the folders as well. And then we also have a neutral oral testimony from Matt Bengesser from the Attorney General's office. Matt, if you want to step up and speak to that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Matt Ben-Gesser from the Kansas Attorney General's Office. I'm the administrative counsel there, and thank you for the opportunity to provide some neutral testimony today. And so we initially had some concerns about the Senate Bill 254 as written. Senator Tyson, to her credit, contacted our office last night and walked through some things with us and is moving forward with an amendment. And so as the amendment is presented, the Oregon model that she would like to utilize, our office does not have constitutional concerns over that method, and therefore our concerns are alleviated. So we do thank the good senator for her work on that. Her leadership was very helpful in rectifying and making sure this bill would be successful. So,
Very good. Committee, any questions? Seeing none, thank you, Matt.
thank you, Senator.
So I think, committee, what we will do is we'll close the hearing on both 249. Well, I don't know if we close the hearing on, we can close the hearing on both, and we'll get the amendment before we work it, and we'll try to get it to, well, we'll probably do that early next week and take care of that as fast as we can get that, turned around before we work it, so everybody has a chance to discuss it. That is all of our work for today, committee, and we will meet on Monday. And with that, we are adjourned.